For my preliminary task, I used an establishing shot of the school grounds. Although this setting fit with the narrative of the task, it looked amateur and unprofessional. Therefore, I decided to change things around for my final film opening and use a tracked tilt shot. I used this shot from top to bottom within the forest I was filming in. I wanted to differ things between my final opening and the preliminary task, as I didn't want to follow the same steps, hence the change in the opening establishing shot. Both shots in the films were recorded on a tripod to prevent any unsteadiness. However, when you use the tilt feature on a tripod, it's hard to avoid any shake and movement. This is an issue I faced during the production of both The Missing and The Revenge. However, I developed many new skills during the progression of this, one being speeding up or slowing down a certain shot to avoid any visible shakiness. If I was to refilm this certain shot, I would do it at a slower motion to get a smoother, tilted movement. As you could see from the preliminary task, there were many shots with lack of thought and care. The shot where the male character walks across the setting is very bland and creates no suspense at all. In order to achieve this shot, I used a tracking shot with the involvement of a tripod to engage with steady movement. Whilst this was achieved, it did not stand out to be heightened with anticipation. Whilst the narrative was school and people related, and the setting did look right, the background was too cluttered, which made it look unprofessional and careless. In The Missing, I used similar shots, however, instead of tracking, I stood still with the camera on a tripod. The female protagonist ran by at pace, which both hid her identity from the start and left the audience feeling unsteady about what was to happen next. This demonstrates how much more thought and time went into the final piece in comparison to the preliminary task. In my preliminary task, I used a close-up shot to show my male character walking. This also demonstrated to the audience that he was male, due to the focus on his trainers. I enjoyed filming these types of shots and wanted to incorporate something similar into my final piece. I improved on this shot by having my actress run over the camera from both angles. This hid her identity as no face or body was shown, therefore I was able to create tension and mystery from a simple shot. I feel the shot works effectively with the narrative and music of escapism, and the use of fast-paced editing and cross-dissolves helped the film flow smoothly. A shot that I can relate both films to is another close-up of feet walking. I like these kind of shots as it doesn't show anybody's identity, giving off a sense of mystery and fear, which is what a thriller film should be about. I use stairs as a prop in The Revenge and The Missing. This shows the journey is to something, but it's never given away what it could be. I feel that The Missing's version of this shot is a lot better than the preliminary, and this is down to me learning new techniques on the editing software Adobe Premiere Pro. I also prefer the pace at which the male is walking in The Missing rather than The Revenge. However, this shows a contrast in narrative and between characters. For my match on action shot in the preliminary task, I used a generic door opening shot. This did not challenge me at all and therefore shows the lack of planning and thought that went into it and the process. In The Missing, I improved immensely on this shot by having my female character reach out for a poster for her then reading it. This is not something I had seen frequently in thriller films and helped me to make my final film stand out. Although it took a lot of editing to get correct timings, I think it works effectively with what the narrative is trying to portray and the timings of the music. In both films, I feel the titles reflect off each other. The Revenge titles start with a cut to a black page with white writing on. This then improves by fading into a bright red colour. I chose red due to its dark connotations that relate to a thriller, for example, blood, sex, drama and danger. The editing was poor for this part of the film as it was jumpy. This is down to me not having any cross dissolves or fades, these of which I did not know about at the time. However, I did like the simplicity of the titles and used features of them in The Missing. For example, after thought and consideration, I changed my titles for a final time to a deep red colour and a simple font. After trying out different fonts and textures, I decided a simple option was the better option. I used a checkerboard effect to build up the titles. This shows progression within as I did not know what or how to use the effects previously. In the preliminary task, I used a close-up shot of a face towards the end of the film. This looked amateur because the camera was shaking due to it being handheld. I didn't change any of the lighting, therefore the sunlight of the shot made it look very unrealistic to be a horror film. As for the final film opening, instead of a close-up, I used an extreme close-up shot. I wanted to use one of these shots after doing my research and finding out that this was a popular convention of the thriller genre. I aimed for her eyes to show her distress and to heighten the anticipation. Because there was less to see, I believe there was more to think about. The narratives differed a lot between the two. I think that The Revenge had more horror elements than thriller, and The Missing was completely thriller-based. The different shot types helped to deliver to the audience the narrative and the way in which it flows. The setting for The Missing helped to show more realistic elements, whereas The Revenge looked unprofessional because it was shot in school grounds. I believe that the editing took a huge impact on the narrative because it helped distinguish the darker side of the film, whereas in the preliminary, only basic editing was used, so nothing about it was scary or believable. For editing in The Missing, I used numerous transitions and the effects to make it reach the best of my ability. I used an effect called ghosting for the flashbacks. This was something new I'd learned in the progression of making my film. I also used a lot of crossfades and dips to blacks to help the entire film flow smoothly. Something I noticed when looking back at my preliminary is the lack of editing. This is due to having a limited time period to complete it in and not really showing any thorough thought. I think that the music for both films worked well with what's being portrayed on screen. The music for my preliminary created no suspense, whereas in The Missing it was constantly gaining anticipation for the audience. I merged two songs together for this film with the use of exponential fades on Premiere Pro. Although I like both soundtracks for both films, I think that The Missing is better because there's no dialogue. This keeps identities hidden, so there's more to think about. When the two soundtracks are compared, it is evident that I spent more time and care on The Missing than I did on The Revenge. This also reflects on the feedback I received from both films. Overall, it's clear that The Missing is a lot better than The Revenge. This is down to me having a longer time period to produce it and knowing more about techniques on a range of different softwares. During the process, I learned how to undertake research and planning methods. I did not do any relevant planning for the preliminary task, and that shows. However, for The Missing, I did endless amounts of planning to come out with a better outcome. During the progression, I've picked up new skills and incorporated them. This is what differentiates The Missing from The Revenge. The quality overall of my final opening is a lot better than the preliminary. This has been shown due to a range of feedback I received from social media websites and from people's reactions when they watch.